The cruelest thing about being ignored is that nobody notices you are disappearing until you are already gone. Crystal chandeliers glowed above the enormous Manhattan ballroom, while laughter, champagne glasses, and soft piano music blended together beneath the golden lights of the Walker family winter gala. Wealthy investors, politicians, and socialites filled the room wearing custom suits and glittering jewelry, while servers moved gracefully between marble columns carrying silver trays of champagne. At the center of it all stood Ethan Walker with one hand resting casually inside his pocket, while several businessmen laughed around him near the grand staircase. "Come on," one investor joked while adjusting his tuxedo cufflinks. "You really think your wife would ever leave this life behind?" Ethan smirked before taking a slow sip of whiskey. "Claire," he laughed softly. "She is too attached to this family to ever leave." The group around him chuckled immediately, while expensive watches flashed beneath the ballroom lights. Ethan continued casually, completely unaware that only 20 feet away Claire Walker sat silently near the edge of the room, hearing every word. "She loves the Walker name too much," Ethan added with relaxed confidence. "Honestly, she would not even know where to go without us." Another wave of laughter followed while Claire lowered her eyes quietly toward the untouched champagne glass resting between her hands. Her expression barely changed. That was the dangerous part. Across the ballroom, giant windows overlooked snowy Manhattan streets, glowing beneath cold winter lights, while soft jazz floated through the air around her. Claire sat perfectly still inside the expensive silver dress Ethan's assistant picked for her 3 days earlier, because Ethan himself had forgotten the gala entirely until the morning of the event. Around her, conversations continued effortlessly. People complimented the ballroom decorations. Investors discussed luxury developments in Miami and Aspen. Ethan smiled confidently beneath the chandeliers like a man completely certain his life would always remain exactly the same. Beneath the white tablecloth hidden from everyone around her, Claire slowly unlocked her phone with trembling fingers. On the screen sat a finalized apartment lease agreement for a small brownstone apartment near Beacon Hill in Boston. Her thumb hovered above the signature line while Ethan's laughter echoed across the ballroom once again. "She would never leave," he repeated somewhere behind her. Claire stared at the screen several long seconds before quietly signing her name. A strange calmness moved through her chest afterward. Not excitement, not revenge, relief. Because for the first time in years, she realized she no longer needed Ethan Walker to notice her pain in order to finally walk away from it. Across the room, Ethan continued entertaining guests effortlessly while cameras flashed around him. "You are lucky," another businessman admitted. "Women like Claire usually get tired of this lifestyle eventually." Ethan shook his head confidently. "Not her." Claire finally looked toward him across the ballroom. Tall, charismatic, perfectly composed. The same man she once loved so deeply she abandoned her own interior design career to help build the emotional image surrounding the Walker empire. She remembered tiny apartments before the billions arrived. Cheap coffee shared on freezing mornings. Ethan promising her they would always protect each other from becoming emotionally distant people obsessed with status and appearances. Somewhere along the way, he became exactly that person anyway. Claire swallowed slowly while memories pressed painfully against her chest. Years of canceled anniversaries. Dinner reservations abandoned because investors called. Nights spent alone inside the penthouse staring at snow falling beyond giant windows, while Ethan chased another deal somewhere across the country. The loneliness had not arrived suddenly. It happened quietly, one disappointment at a time, until she no longer recognized herself inside the beautiful life surrounding her. "Mrs. Walker?" a server asked gently while offering another champagne glass. Claire smiled politely and shook her head once. "I am fine, thank you." But she was not fine. She had not been fine for years. Across the ballroom, Ethan finally glanced toward her briefly between conversations. Their eyes met for less than 2 seconds before someone beside him pulled his attention away again almost immediately. Claire watched him disappear back into the crowd of powerful strangers while something inside her finally settled into certainty. He really did not see her anymore. Not truly. Snow continued drifting outside Manhattan, while warm light filled the ballroom behind her. Claire quietly slipped her phone back into her purse beside the signed apartment agreement before standing gracefully from the table. Nobody noticed immediately when she walked toward the exit because the gala continued glittering beautifully without interruption. Ethan Walker kept laughing confidently beneath the chandeliers, completely unaware that while he mocked the idea of losing her, his wife had already begun leaving him behind. People do not usually leave the moment they stop feeling loved. Most stay far longer than they should, quietly hoping the person beside them will finally notice the sadness growing behind their smile. Snow continued falling across Manhattan long after the Walker family gala ended, while black luxury cars disappeared one by one beneath the glowing city lights outside the ballroom. Ethan Walker barely noticed Claire leaving early that night because investors surrounded him near the bar discussing another hotel acquisition in Chicago. "Your wife disappeared," one businessman joked casually while adjusting his coat. Ethan smirked without concern. "She probably got tired of pretending to enjoy these events." The men around him laughed softly while Ethan checked another message from his assistant about an upcoming board meeting in Los Angeles. Everything in his world continued moving exactly as expected. Powerful conversations, expensive whiskey, endless schedules. He never once considered that somewhere across the city Claire Walker sat alone inside the back seat of a quiet black town car, staring silently out the window while snow drifted against the glass beside her. The city looked cold tonight. Endless lights reflecting across wet streets. Crowded sidewalks filled with strangers hurrying beneath umbrellas. Claire rested her forehead lightly against the window while exhaustion settled deep inside her chest. Her phone buzzed softly beside her purse. A message from the Boston property manager confirming apartment access beginning Monday morning. Claire stared at the message several seconds before locking the screen again. The decision still terrified her, but staying terrified her more. Nearly 40 minutes later, Claire stepped quietly into the massive Manhattan penthouse she once believed would become the happiest place in her life. The apartment remained perfectly spotless as always. Warm ambient lighting reflected softly across marble floors, while jazz music still played faintly from hidden ceiling speakers Ethan forgot to turn off before the gala. Claire slowly removed her heels near the entrance before walking deeper into the silence of the apartment. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the snowy skyline, while expensive modern furniture filled the enormous rooms with elegant emptiness. Everything looked beautiful. Nothing felt emotionally alive anymore. Claire paused near the living room bookshelves where framed family photographs lined the walls, carefully curated by interior designers years earlier. Ethan shaking hands with politicians. Ethan at charity events. Ethan beside magazine covers announcing billion-dollar acquisitions. In almost every photograph, Claire stood beside him smiling softly, like part of the carefully polished image surrounding the Walker empire. Her eyes drifted toward one older picture hidden near the corner shelf. A tiny apartment 12 years earlier. Ethan younger, happier, holding cheap takeout containers while laughing beside her on the floor because they could not afford real furniture yet. Claire stared at the photo while emotion tightened painfully inside her throat. Back then, Ethan used to look directly at her when she spoke. Back then, she mattered more than appearances. Slowly, Claire walked toward the bedroom suite while silence echoed around her footsteps. She opened the enormous custom closet and looked quietly at rows of expensive dresses, designer handbags, and carefully organized shoes purchased over years Ethan spent trying to compensate for emotional absence with luxury. Claire reached for an empty suitcase already hidden near the back wall. She packed slowly, methodically, not like someone running away impulsively, more like someone finally accepting a truth she spent years avoiding. Sweaters first, sketchbooks next. Personal photographs Ethan never noticed disappearing from shelves over recent weeks. Outside the windows, Manhattan glittered coldly beneath the snow, while inside the penthouse, Claire continued quietly dismantling pieces of her life. Hours passed without Ethan calling once. Around 1:30 in the morning, the apartment doors finally opened behind her. Ethan entered distractedly while loosening his tie and scrolling through emails on his phone. "You left early," he said casually without looking up. Claire remained kneeling beside the suitcase across the bedroom. "I was tired." Ethan nodded absent-mindedly while setting his phone on the dresser. "You should have stayed. Senator Hayes wanted to speak with us about the Palm Beach fundraiser." Claire looked at him silently several seconds, waiting for him to finally notice the half-empty closet surrounding her. He did not. Ethan walked toward the bathroom while continuing another conversation about business projections. "Did the dry cleaning arrive today?" he asked from across the room. Claire lowered her eyes slowly. "Yes." "Good," Ethan answered distractedly. "I need the Navy suit for Boston next week." Claire almost laughed softly at the irony of it. Boston, the city where she was quietly rebuilding a future without him, while Ethan still believed she existed permanently inside the background of his life. Steam from the shower began filling the bathroom moments later, while Claire sat motionless beside the packed suitcase, staring toward the marble floor beneath her knees. Tears gathered silently inside her eyes, not because Ethan was cruel, but because he truly did not see her anymore. And somehow that hurt even more. The saddest part about emotional distance is how ordinary it looks from the outside, while quietly destroying someone from within. 3 mornings after the Walker family gala, pale winter sunlight spread softly across the marble kitchen inside the Manhattan penthouse, while Claire Walker stood alone beside the espresso machine preparing coffee that Ethan would barely touch before rushing into another meeting. Snow still covered the rooftops outside the enormous windows while soft jazz drifted quietly through hidden speakers overhead. The apartment looked perfect as always. Clean counters, fresh flowers replaced every Monday, expensive silence filling every room. Claire wrapped both hands around the warm coffee mug while staring toward the skyline beyond the glass. Somewhere beneath all the luxury and routine, she no longer felt like a wife inside this home. She felt like part of the furniture, maintaining the illusion of warmth around Ethan Walker's carefully controlled life. Behind her, footsteps echoed softly through the hallway. Ethan entered the kitchen, adjusting the cuff of his navy suit while reading financial updates on his phone. "Morning," Claire said gently. Ethan nodded distractedly without looking up. "Morning." Claire watched him move around the kitchen, searching for documents while the untouched coffee sat cooling beside him. "Your flight leaves at 10, she reminded quietly. "Chicago first, then Boston." Ethan grabbed the coffee cup automatically before setting it back down again, untouched. "Right." He glanced briefly toward her. "Can you have Melissa confirm the dinner reservation for Thursday?" Claire lowered her eyes slightly. Thursday was their anniversary. Ethan already forgot again. "Thursday?" she asked softly. Ethan looked confused for half a second before his phone buzzed again, pulling his attention away. "The investor dinner," he answered distractedly. "At the Four Seasons." Claire remained silent several seconds while sadness moved quietly across her face. "Of course," she said finally. Ethan never noticed the change in her expression. He was already responding to another email before walking toward the hallway. "I will be back late tonight," he added casually. "Do not wait up." The apartment doors closed behind him moments later, leaving silence rushing back into the penthouse once again. Claire stood motionless beside the untouched coffee while winter sunlight reflected coldly across the marble counters around her. Then slowly she walked toward the trash can and poured the coffee away. Across Manhattan, Ethan sat inside the back seat of a black luxury SUV, reviewing financial reports while traffic crawled beneath gray winter skies outside. His assistant Melissa handed him another folder carefully. "Your mother called twice this morning," she informed him. Ethan barely looked up. "About what?" "She mentioned your anniversary dinner tomorrow night." Ethan frowned slightly while continuing to read. "Tomorrow?" Melissa hesitated awkwardly. "Actually, Thursday." Ethan leaned back, briefly rubbing tired fingers against his forehead. "Right." He stared out the window several seconds before speaking again. "Send Claire flowers or something." Melissa nodded politely while writing notes into her tablet. Ethan returned immediately to work mode afterward because somewhere over the years emotional gestures became tasks delegated through assistants instead of moments shared personally. Back inside the penthouse, Claire moved quietly through the enormous bedroom suite, opening drawers and closets with calm precision. One suitcase already sat packed near the corner wall hidden behind winter coats. Ethan never touched himself because staff organized everything for him automatically. Claire folded sweaters carefully beside sketchbooks and old photographs she planned to take to Boston. Her movements remained slow and controlled because emotionally, she crossed this bridge long before physically preparing to leave. She paused near the dresser while opening a small velvet jewelry box. Inside rested her wedding ring beneath soft lighting. Claire touched it gently while memories surfaced all at once. Tiny apartments before the money. Ethan carrying groceries upstairs because the elevator barely worked. Nights sitting on the fire escape sharing cheap pizza while dreaming about a future they promised would never change them emotionally. Claire closed her eyes tightly because somewhere beneath the billionaire image, Ethan Walker became unrecognizable even to himself. Her phone buzzed softly against the dresser, interrupting the memory. A message from Daniel Reed appeared across the screen. The Boston Hotel project officially starts Monday. Looking forward to working with you. Claire stared at the message quietly. Daniel was one of the few architects who still remembered her work before she disappeared behind the Walker family image. Months earlier, he offered her a consulting role helping redesign a boutique hotel near Beacon Hill. At first, Claire almost declined automatically because Ethan's schedule always came first. But now the message felt different somehow. Less like work, more like a doorway back toward herself. Claire walked slowly toward the giant windows overlooking Manhattan while snow drifted quietly between the skyscrapers below. Somewhere across the city, Ethan Walker still believed she was too emotionally attached to leave him. The painful truth was far worse than that. Claire spent years attached to the memory of who they used to be together, while the man standing beside her slowly disappeared into someone emotionally unreachable. And now, for the first time in a very long time, she was finally beginning to let that memory go. Sometimes the loneliest feeling in the world is realizing you already left emotionally long before your body finally walked away. Monday morning arrived wrapped in gray skies and soft falling snow, while Claire Walker stood alone inside the nearly empty Manhattan penthouse, watching movers quietly carry sealed cardboard boxes toward the private elevator. The apartment echoed strangely now. Fewer personal photographs lined the shelves. Half the closet stood empty. Even the air felt different somehow, like the home itself already understood she no longer belonged there. Claire wrapped her camel-colored coat tighter around herself while holding a small sketchbook against her chest. Outside the giant windows, Manhattan disappeared beneath pale winter fog and snow-covered rooftops. Somewhere downtown, Ethan Walker was likely standing inside another boardroom discussing numbers large enough to impress strangers while remaining completely unaware that his wife was dismantling their entire life piece by piece. One of the movers approached carefully. "Ms. Walker, these last boxes are heading to storage in Boston." Claire nodded softly. "Thank you." Her voice sounded calm even to herself now. Not cold, just emotionally exhausted in a way that no longer needed dramatic reactions to survive. The elevator doors closed quietly behind the movers moments later, leaving the apartment silent once again. Claire slowly walked toward the kitchen where one untouched coffee mug still rested beside the marble counter from the morning Ethan left for Chicago. She stared at it several seconds before rinsing it clean and placing it carefully back inside the cabinet. Such a small action, yet somehow it felt like burying the final routine holding their marriage together. Her phone buzzed softly against the countertop. "Daniel Reed." Claire answered after a brief hesitation. "Hello. Please tell me you are still coming to Boston," Daniel said warmly through the speaker. Construction noise echoed faintly behind his voice. Claire glanced around the enormous penthouse one final time before answering. "I am leaving today." "Good," Daniel replied gently. "The hotel needs someone who understands warmth." Claire lowered her eyes quietly because Ethan used to describe her designs as pretty while Daniel described them as emotionally alive. The difference mattered more than she realized. Across Chicago, Ethan Walker sat inside a private conference suite 20 floors above the city while executives discussed acquisition contracts around a polished glass table. The Boston expansion should finalize next quarter, one investor explained while pointing toward projected numbers on a giant screen. Ethan nodded distractedly while scrolling through unread emails on his phone beneath the table. One message from Claire remained unopened from nearly 2 days earlier. He barely noticed it anymore, because somewhere over the years communication between them became background noise inside his overwhelmingly scheduled life. "Ethan," another executive asked, "do you agree with the revised timeline?" Ethan looked up automatically. "Yes. Fine." The meeting continued immediately. Numbers. Strategies. Hotels. Growth. Everything Ethan built successfully while losing something far more important without noticing. Hours later, snow covered the Manhattan streets heavily by the time Claire finally stepped inside the private elevator, carrying only one final overnight bag beside her. The penthouse doors remained open behind her, while warm ambient lighting spilled softly across empty marble floors. Claire turned around one last time, looking at the apartment she once fought desperately to make feel emotionally alive. Fresh flowers she arranged herself every Monday still rested beside the dining table. Jazz music still played quietly through hidden speakers. Family photographs still smiled beautifully from silver frames. To outsiders, the penthouse looked like proof of perfect success. Claire knew better. Slowly, she walked toward the kitchen counter and removed her wedding ring beneath the soft undercabinet lights. For several long seconds, she stared at it resting in her palm, while memories flooded painfully through her chest. Ethan kissing her forehead in tiny apartments before the money arrived, promising they would never become emotionally distant people obsessed with status. Holding her hand during freezing subway rides because they could not afford taxis yet. Claire closed her eyes briefly before placing the ring carefully beside a folded handwritten note on the marble counter. You love the image of our family more than the woman standing inside it. Tears gathered silently inside her eyes while snow drifted beyond the windows overlooking Manhattan. Then finally, after years of waiting for Ethan Walker to emotionally come home to her, Claire picked up her overnight bag and stepped inside the elevator without looking back again. Several hours later, Ethan returned unexpectedly to Manhattan after canceling dinner plans with investors due to exhaustion. The penthouse greeted him with complete silence when he entered shortly before midnight. Ethan loosened his tie while walking toward the kitchen, distractedly checking another email on his phone. Then he stopped. Something felt wrong immediately. Too quiet. Too empty. His eyes slowly moved toward the marble counter where Claire's wedding ring rested beneath the soft kitchen lights beside the folded note waiting silently for him. Ethan stared at it without breathing for several seconds while the entire apartment suddenly felt colder than the snowstorm raging outside the windows. The moment someone truly leaves your life is not when they walk out the door. It is when the silence they leave behind suddenly becomes louder than their presence ever was. Ethan Walker stood motionless inside the Manhattan penthouse kitchen while snow battered the windows overlooking the dark city skyline outside. The wedding ring still rested beneath the soft undercabinet lights beside Claire's folded note. For several long seconds, Ethan simply stared at the handwriting like his mind refused to understand what his eyes were seeing. Then slowly he unfolded the paper again. You love the image of our family more than the woman standing inside it. Ethan exhaled sharply while confusion tightened across his face. What the hell does that even mean? He muttered quietly into the empty apartment. His voice echoed strangely through the silence, because for the first time in years the penthouse no longer carried Claire's warmth moving softly through the background of his life. No jazz music playing from the kitchen in the morning. No quiet footsteps near the windows. No fresh coffee waiting beside his schedule every sunrise. Just silence. Ethan grabbed his phone immediately and called Claire. Straight to voicemail. He called again. Same result. Irritation rose first, not panic. Claire, he said after the tone, while pacing slowly across the marble floor. I do not know what kind of point you were trying to make here, but call me back. He ended the message sharply before dialing Melissa next. Find out where Claire went, he ordered immediately. Melissa hesitated briefly through the speaker. Sir, I thought Mrs. Walker was with you. Ethan looked around the half-empty apartment again, while something unfamiliar moved uncomfortably through his chest. She is not. Hours later, the penthouse still felt disturbingly quiet, while Ethan wandered from room to room, unable to settle his thoughts. He opened the closet and froze immediately at the empty spaces lining the shelves. Half her clothes gone. Several drawers completely cleared out. Even some photographs missing from the walls. Ethan stared silently at the missing pieces of her existence surrounding him like evidence from a crime scene he never saw happening. How long had she been preparing this? His eyes landed on the guest room where Claire used to sketch interior designs late at night years earlier before slowly giving up her career to support his expanding business empire. Ethan stepped inside carefully. Dust rested lightly across the old drafting table near the windows. One sketchbook remained forgotten beneath a stack of magazines. Ethan picked it up slowly before flipping through pages filled with warm hotel interiors, intimate cafes, soft lighting concepts, and handwritten notes about emotional atmosphere. Then near the back, he found a drawing of the Manhattan penthouse. Giant windows. Expensive furniture. One woman sitting alone near the center of the room while snow covered the city outside. Beneath the sketch, Claire had written something softly in pencil. A beautiful home can still feel emotionally abandoned. Ethan stared at the sentence while guilt flickered uncomfortably across his face for the first time. Across Boston, meanwhile, Claire Walker sat quietly beside the window of a small apartment overlooking snow-covered brownstone streets, while warm morning light spilled across unfinished moving boxes around her. The apartment looked simple compared to Manhattan. Wooden floors, tiny kitchen, narrow hallways. Yet somehow every corner already felt calmer than the enormous penthouse she left behind. Claire wrapped both hands around a cup of coffee while soft jazz played gently from a small speaker near the bookshelf. For the first time in years, she drank coffee without checking Ethan's schedule first. No assistance. No galas. No waiting for midnight elevator sounds, hoping her husband might finally come home emotionally present for once. Her phone buzzed softly across the table. Ethan again. Claire stared at the screen several seconds while sadness moved quietly behind her eyes. She still loved him in painful ways. That was the hardest part. Leaving someone you no longer love is simple compared to leaving someone who slowly stopped loving you correctly. The phone continued vibrating against the table before finally going silent again. Claire looked outside toward the peaceful Boston street below while snow drifted softly through the pale winter morning. A knock sounded gently at her apartment door moments later. Claire opened it to find Daniel Reed standing there holding 2 coffees and a paper bag from a local bakery. "I guessed you forgot breakfast while unpacking," he said with a small warm smile. Claire laughed softly despite herself while stepping aside to let him enter. Daniel glanced around the apartment. "It already feels more like you than Manhattan ever did." Claire looked slowly around the small warm space filled with half-opened sketchbooks and moving boxes. Then quietly, almost to herself, she answered, "That is because I can finally breathe here." Back in Manhattan, Ethan sat alone later that night at the massive dining table where untouched food rested beneath dim lighting while snow pressed heavily against the windows outside. Across from him, Claire's chair remained empty. Ethan looked toward it absent-mindedly before realizing something painful for the very first time. He genuinely could not remember the last meaningful conversation they shared without business interruptions, phone calls, or emotional distance standing between them. And suddenly the silence inside the penthouse no longer felt temporary. It felt like the beginning of losing something he wrongly believed would always wait for him forever. Healing does not always arrive loudly. Sometimes it begins quietly on ordinary mornings when you suddenly realize your chest no longer feels heavy the moment you wake up. 2 weeks passed slowly beneath the cold beauty of a Boston winter, while Claire Walker stood near the center of an unfinished boutique hotel lobby, watching pale sunlight pour through massive windows across exposed wooden floors and partially painted walls. Construction workers moved calmly around the open space, carrying materials while soft jazz played from a portable speaker somewhere near the reception desk. The entire building smelled faintly like fresh wood, coffee, and dust. Claire held rolled design sketches against her chest while studying the lobby carefully. Warm lighting near the fireplace. Softer fabrics near the lounge seating. Comfortable spaces where people could breathe emotionally instead of simply admiring expensive decorations. "You always design rooms like you are trying to heal people inside them," Daniel Reed said gently while walking beside her holding 2 paper coffee cups. Claire accepted one with a small grateful smile. "Maybe I am trying to heal myself too." Daniel studied her quietly several seconds, but did not push further. That was one of the things Claire appreciated most about him. He never forced emotional conversations out of her. He simply created calm spaces where silence felt safe instead of lonely. Outside the hotel, large snowflakes drifted slowly across the quiet Boston street, while pedestrians hurried beneath scarves and winter coats. Claire wrapped both hands around the warm coffee cup while watching the snow fall through the windows. "You look different lately," Daniel said carefully. Claire smiled faintly without looking away from the snow. "Different how?" "Lighter," he answered honestly. Claire lowered her eyes toward the coffee in her hands because part of her wanted to disagree automatically. She still cried some nights. She still reached for her phone occasionally before remembering Ethan was no longer waiting on the other side of her routines. But Daniel was right about one thing. The crushing emotional exhaustion inside her chest had finally started loosening little by little. Back in Manhattan, meanwhile, Ethan Walker sat alone inside his enormous office, staring absent-mindedly at the Boston skyline projected across a digital presentation screen during a corporate meeting. Voices continued discussing expansion forecasts around him, while Ethan barely processed a single word. His mind kept drifting back toward the empty penthouse waiting for him every night, toward Claire's untouched side of the closet, toward the terrifying realization that he genuinely did not know how long she had been emotionally unhappy beside him. "Ethan," one executive interrupted carefully, "do you want to approve the revised numbers?" Ethan blinked slowly before straightening in his chair. "Yes, fine." But nothing actually felt fine anymore. After the meeting ended, Ethan remained alone inside the conference room, staring through floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Manhattan. Snow covered the city beneath gray skies while silence settled heavily around him. His phone rested motionless beside his hand. No messages from Claire. No reminders about dinners. No quiet check-ins asking if he landed safely after flights. Ethan once believed those small gestures would exist forever automatically, because Claire loved the Walker family too much to leave. Now every missing detail felt unbearable. Later that evening, Ethan returned once again to the massive penthouse, where darkness greeted him immediately after opening the doors. He stood silently near the entrance several long seconds before switching on the lights. The apartment still looked perfect. Marble floors polished, furniture untouched, expensive artwork glowing beneath soft lighting. Yet emotionally the space felt hollow now in ways Ethan could no longer ignore. He walked slowly toward the kitchen and stopped beside the coffee machine, where Claire used to stand every morning. Suddenly memories hit him sharply all at once. Claire waiting beside cold dinners while pretending not to be disappointed. Claire sitting silently through galas while he entertained investors for hours. Claire asking him once during a winter night years earlier, "Do you ever miss us?" Ethan closed his eyes tightly because he remembered answering without looking away from his laptop. "We are fine, Claire." But they were never fine. He simply stopped paying attention before everything broke completely. Across Boston, Claire sat later that night beside the apartment window wearing an oversized cream sweater while snow drifted peacefully through the streetlights outside. Her sketchbook rested open across her lap, filled with hotel redesign ideas and handwritten notes. Soft jazz played quietly nearby, while warm lamp light filled the small apartment. For the first time in years, she felt emotionally present inside her own life, instead of surviving quietly inside someone else's schedule. Her phone buzzed suddenly against the coffee table. "Ethan." Claire stared at his name silently, while her heartbeat tightened unexpectedly inside her chest. The call continued vibrating several long seconds before stopping again. A voicemail notification appeared moments later. Claire hesitated before pressing play. Ethan's voice sounded softer than she remembered. "Tired somehow. I know you probably do not want to talk to me right now," he said quietly through the speaker. "But I think I finally understand that I stopped seeing you long before you left." Silence followed briefly before he continued, almost painfully honest now. "And I do not know how to fix something I did not even realize I was destroying." Claire lowered her eyes slowly while snow continued falling beyond the window beside her. Then, after a long silence, she locked the phone screen gently and returned to sketching warm hotel interiors beneath the quiet glow of the apartment lights, while somewhere hundreds of miles away, Ethan Walker sat alone inside a penthouse, finally beginning to understand the emotional cost of taking someone's love for granted for far too long. People rarely notice the exact moment they become strangers to someone they once promised forever to. It happens slowly through missed conversations, empty routines, and silence that grows heavier year after year until one day the distance feels impossible to cross. Early February sunlight spilled softly through the unfinished windows of the Boston Boutique Hotel, while Claire Walker stood beside a long wooden table covered in fabric samples, paint palettes, and hand-drawn sketches. Construction noise echoed gently through the open lobby while workers installed lighting fixtures overhead. The entire space still looked incomplete, yet somehow it already carried more emotional warmth than the Manhattan penthouse ever did. Claire adjusted a velvet fabric sample beside the fireplace lounge concept, while Daniel Reed studied her sketches nearby. "You notice details nobody else sees," he said quietly. Claire smiled faintly without looking up. Details are usually what make people feel safe somewhere. Daniel watched her carefully for a moment before responding. I think you spent a long time creating emotional safety for everyone except yourself. Claire's hands paused briefly above the sketches. The words landed softly but painfully true. For years, she organized Ethan's life perfectly. Family dinners, charity events, beautiful homes, warm environments where everyone around Ethan felt welcomed and admired. Meanwhile, no one noticed how emotionally empty she became standing quietly inside the background of it all. Claire exhaled slowly before changing the subject gently. The lighting near the entrance still feels too cold. Daniel smiled knowingly, but allowed the conversation to shift. Then we warm it up. Outside the hotel, snow melted slowly beneath weak afternoon sunlight, while Boston moved calmly around them. Inside the lobby, Claire suddenly realized something strange. She no longer woke up every morning feeling emotionally anxious, waiting for disappointment. The realization almost frightened her, because she forgot peace could feel this quiet. Back in Manhattan, however, peace no longer existed anywhere inside Ethan Walker's world. The penthouse had become unbearable at night. Too silent, too organized, too empty. Ethan sat alone near the massive living room windows holding a glass of whiskey he barely touched while snow drifted slowly across the skyline outside. His phone rested beside him, open to old photographs of Claire. Not gala photographs, not magazine appearances, private moments. Claire laughing in oversized sweaters years earlier inside their tiny first apartment. Claire asleep beside stacks of design sketches on the floor. Claire holding coffee cups during freezing mornings before success complicated everything around them. Ethan rubbed tired fingers against his jaw while guilt settled heavily inside his chest. He kept replaying moments differently now. The anniversary dinners he missed. The conversations he ended too quickly. The nights Claire waited beside untouched meals while he answered emails across the table. At the time, none of it seemed catastrophic. Just normal sacrifices successful people made temporarily. Except temporary slowly became permanent until Claire disappeared emotionally right beside him without Ethan noticing. His phone buzzed suddenly across the glass table. Melissa. Sir, I finally found where Mrs. Walker relocated. Ethan sat upright immediately. Where? Boston, Melissa answered carefully. She is consulting on a boutique hotel renovation with architect Daniel Reed. Ethan stared silently toward the snowy skyline, while something sharp tightened painfully through his chest. Boston, the same city Claire quietly signed papers for during the gala while he laughed about her never leaving. Ethan closed his eyes, briefly remembering every arrogant word. She is too attached to this family. God, how blind he sounded now. Do you want me to arrange a meeting? Melissa asked gently. Ethan remained silent several long seconds before answering quietly. No, but even as he said the word, he already knew he was lying to himself. Across Boston later that evening, Claire stood alone inside the nearly completed hotel lobby while golden lights glowed warmly across polished wooden floors for the very first time. Workers had finally finished installing the lighting system she designed weeks earlier. The entire space transformed instantly. Soft amber reflections spread across the walls while the fireplace lounge felt intimate and emotionally inviting instead of expensive and cold. Claire slowly turned in a circle, taking in the finished atmosphere around her. Warmth, calmness, presence. Daniel appeared beside her carrying 2 paper cups of coffee again. You did it, he said softly. Claire accepted the coffee while emotion shimmered quietly behind her eyes. No, she answered after a long pause. I think I finally found my way back to myself. Daniel smiled gently while soft jazz drifted through hidden speakers overhead. At that exact moment, hundreds of miles away in Manhattan, Ethan Walker stood alone inside the cold luxury of the penthouse, staring at the empty side of the bed where Claire used to sleep. For the first time in his entire life, all the money, power, and success surrounding him suddenly felt completely useless against one devastating truth he could no longer escape. The woman he thought would never leave had already begun building a peaceful life without him. Sometimes the most painful realization comes when you finally see someone glowing beautifully outside the life where they slowly disappeared beside you. Early March brought the first signs of spring to Boston, while soft golden evening light spilled across the elegant lobby of the newly restored Ashford Hotel near Beacon Hill. Guests in tailored coats and evening dresses moved through the space beneath warm amber chandeliers, while quiet jazz music drifted through hidden speakers overhead. Everything inside the hotel felt intimate and emotionally alive. Soft cream furniture surrounded the fireplace lounge. Golden reflections shimmered across polished wooden floors. Fresh flowers rested carefully beside tall windows overlooking the city streets, glowing beneath the early evening sky. Claire Walker stood near the center of the lobby, adjusting the sleeve of her ivory silk dress, while staff members prepared for the official grand opening event beginning within the hour. Her blonde hair rested softly across her shoulders while calm confidence moved naturally through her expression in ways that did not exist months earlier inside Manhattan. "You should see your face right now," Daniel Reed said quietly while approaching beside her with two champagne glasses. Claire accepted one with a small smile. "What does my face look like?" Daniel glanced around the glowing hotel warmly. "Like someone who finally stopped apologizing for taking up space." Claire lowered her eyes briefly because hearing that still felt unfamiliar somehow. For years she learned how to become smaller emotionally beside Ethan Walker. Quieter, easier, less demanding. But standing inside the hotel, she helped transform. Surrounded by warmth she created with her own hands, Claire finally felt visible again without needing permission from anyone else. Guests slowly filled the lobby while soft conversations and laughter blended into the elegant atmosphere around them. Several investors complimented the interior design repeatedly throughout the evening. "This place feels incredible," one woman admitted while admiring the lighting near the fireplace. "It actually feels human." Claire smiled politely while emotion tightened unexpectedly inside her chest, because that was exactly what she wanted people to feel here. Human, comfortable, emotionally present. Then suddenly the revolving front doors opened again behind the crowd. Claire froze immediately. Ethan Walker stepped slowly into the hotel lobby wearing a dark charcoal overcoat, while traces of exhaustion rested beneath his usually controlled expression. For several long seconds the noise around Claire disappeared completely. Ethan stood motionless near the entrance, quietly absorbing the atmosphere surrounding him. Warm lights, soft music, peaceful elegance. Everything inside the hotel felt like Claire in ways he somehow never understood before. Daniel followed Claire's line of sight before immediately recognizing the tension shifting across her face. "You want me to ask him to leave?" he asked carefully. Claire stared silently at Ethan across the crowded lobby. "No," she answered softly after a long pause. "It is okay." Ethan finally noticed her standing beneath the amber lights near the fireplace lounge. His expression changed instantly. Shock first, then something deeper. Something painfully close to regret mixed with admiration. Claire looked different here. Not physically, emotionally, lighter somehow. More alive than she ever looked standing beside him inside the cold perfection of Manhattan galas. Ethan slowly crossed the lobby while guests moved politely around him, unaware of the emotional history hanging silently between them. "Claire," he said quietly after stopping several feet away. Claire met his eyes calmly. "Ethan." For a moment neither of them spoke. Jazz music drifted softly overhead, while warm golden light reflected across the polished floors surrounding them. Ethan glanced around the hotel again before returning his attention to her. "You designed this?" Claire nodded once. "Most of it." Ethan swallowed slowly while looking around at the peaceful atmosphere she created. "It feels," he paused, carefully searching for the right word. "Warm." Claire almost smiled sadly because warm was exactly what their marriage stopped feeling years ago. Daniel stepped beside her respectfully, but kept enough distance to avoid intrusion. Ethan noticed him immediately. "Daniel Reed," Ethan said quietly, recognizing the architect from business magazines. Daniel nodded politely. "Mr. Walker." Silence settled briefly between the three of them before another guest approached Claire enthusiastically. "Ms. Walker, everyone is asking about the lobby design." Claire smiled warmly. "I will be right there." The guest walked away moments later, leaving Ethan staring at her differently now. Not as his wife, standing quietly behind the Walker name. Not as part of a carefully curated billionaire image. But as someone talented, emotionally intelligent, and fully capable of building beauty without him. Ethan lowered his eyes briefly while guilt moved visibly across his face. "I did not realize how much of yourself you gave up for my life," he admitted quietly. Claire looked at him steadily beneath the warm hotel lights. Neither did I for a long time. Ethan glanced around the lobby one more time while guests continued admiring the atmosphere Claire created. Then finally he looked back at her with painful honesty, settling quietly into his expression. I thought you were too attached to leave. Claire's eyes softened sadly for the first time that evening. I was attached, she answered gently. Just not to the loneliness. Ethan stood silently beneath the warm amber glow of the hotel lobby, while the truth settled painfully through him at last. The woman he once believed would never walk away was no longer emotionally waiting for him anymore. The hardest endings are not the ones filled with screaming or hatred. They are the quiet ones where two people finally stand face to face and realize love alone was never enough to save what silence slowly destroyed. The grand opening celebration at the Ashford Hotel continued softly around them, while warm jazz music drifted through the glowing Boston lobby beneath golden chandeliers. Guests laughed quietly beside the fireplace lounge, while glasses clinked gently somewhere near the bar. Yet inside the stillness, standing between Claire Walker and Ethan Walker, none of the noise around them seemed to exist anymore. Ethan remained motionless beneath the warm amber lights while watching Claire greet guests with calm confidence only a few feet away from him. She moved naturally through the beautiful space she created, smiling softly, speaking comfortably, emotionally present in ways he had not seen from her in years. And suddenly Ethan understood something painful. Claire had not changed into someone new after leaving him. She simply became herself again. Hours later, the event slowly quieted as guests disappeared into elevators and Blacktown cars outside beneath the cold Boston night. Soft rain replaced the snow sometime after midnight, while reflections from streetlights shimmered across the wet pavement beyond the hotel windows. Claire stood alone near the lobby entrance gathering a few remaining design sketches when Ethan approached her carefully once more. "Can we talk?" he asked quietly. Claire hesitated only briefly before nodding softly. Together, they stepped outside beneath the covered hotel entrance while cold spring air moved gently through the night around them. Boston looked peaceful after the rain. Quiet sidewalks, golden lights glowing through restaurant windows nearby, cars passing slowly across the wet streets. Ethan slipped both hands into the pockets of his overcoat while staring toward the city for several long seconds before finally speaking again. "I spent weeks trying to understand how I did not see this happening," he admitted quietly. Claire wrapped her coat tighter around herself while listening silently beside him. Ethan gave a small bitter laugh without humor. "The truth is, you were disappearing right in front of me for years." Claire lowered her eyes slowly because hearing him finally say it out loud still hurt more than she expected somehow. "I kept waiting for you to notice," she answered gently. Ethan nodded once while guilt moved visibly across his face. "I know." Rainwater reflected softly across the sidewalk while silence settled between them again. Not angry silence anymore. Just two exhausted people standing honestly inside the ruins of something they once loved deeply. Ethan looked toward her carefully. "I thought providing everything meant I was taking care of you." Claire's eyes drifted toward the warm hotel windows behind them. "You gave me beautiful places to live," she said softly. "But eventually I stopped feeling emotionally alive inside them." Ethan swallowed hard while emotion tightened across his expression. "I would change it if I could." Claire believed him. That was the painful part. She knew Ethan was sincere now. But sincerity, arriving years too late, still leaves damage behind it. "I do not hate you," she admitted quietly. Ethan looked at her immediately, almost surprised by the softness in her voice. Claire gave a faint, sad smile. "I think I stopped hating the situation once I finally started healing from it." The rain slowed gently around them, while warm golden lights spilled through the hotel entrance behind Claire. Ethan stared at her several seconds before speaking again in a voice quieter than she had ever heard from him before. "Do you still love me?" Claire closed her eyes briefly because some questions hurt no matter how much time passes. When she looked back at him, tears shimmered softly beneath the city lights. "Part of me probably always will," she answered honestly. "But love is not supposed to feel like loneliness all the time." Ethan lowered his head slowly while the truth settled heavily between them. Claire stepped slightly closer before speaking one final time. "You once said I was too attached to this family to leave." Ethan looked up at her silently. Claire's expression softened with heartbreaking calmness. "But I was never attached to the money or the penthouse or the Walker name." Her voice trembled slightly before steadying again. I was attached to the version of us that disappeared a long time ago. Ethan's eyes filled quietly with regret while rainwater glistened across the empty Boston street beside them. Neither of them spoke for several seconds afterward because there was nothing left to defend anymore. No pride, no anger, just truth. Finally, Claire reached up gently and touched Ethan's hand for the last time. I hope one day you build a life that feels emotionally real to you too, she whispered softly. Then slowly she stepped back beneath the warm glow of the hotel entrance while Ethan remained standing alone beneath the fading rain. Claire looked at him one final time before turning toward the lobby doors. Inside the Ashford Hotel, warm jazz music still drifted softly through the beautiful space she helped create. Guests laughed quietly near the fireplace. Golden light reflected across polished floors. Life continued peacefully forward. Ethan watched Claire disappear back into the warmth of her new life, while the cold Boston night settled around him at last. And for the first time since losing her, he finally understood the devastating truth that would stay with him forever. The woman he thought was too attached to leave had only been waiting for love to feel like home again. When it never did, she learned how to become her own home instead.